Meghan wrote a letter pleading for paid leave. This video is about the rhetorical strategies that Meghan uses in this letter. It's not about whether or not paid leave's right or wrong. The letter follows the guideline for constitutive rhetoric aimed at persuasion. Understanding the strategies behind persuasion is important in the current media landscape, where politicians and the media are constantly trying to persuade. By the end of this video, you'll be able to identify some of the most important of these strategies. I'm a linguist trained in linguistic methods that are designed to decode statements and conversations. I analyze the language of criminals and media personalities. If you find this kind of content exciting, please subscribe to the channel. Constitutive rhetoric is a term used by Maurice Chalon. Briefly put, the writer creates a collective identity, a so-called second persona, that the readers ideally identify themselves with. Linguistically, the writer forces a self-perception upon the readers in order to persuade them about something, and most often get them to do something, get them to act in the real world. Constitutive rhetoric consists of 3 ideological effects, and they are all applied by the writer for self-serving reasons, to ensure that people reading the text will be on their side. The first ideological effect is to create identification across all social classes, a collective we or a collective protagonist. The second ideological effect is to make this collective we transhistorical. This means alleging that it's been in existence for a long time. The writer often disregards the objection that people and events of the past might not be directly linked to present-day people and events. The writer's goal is to make it seem like we're all connected across time and space. The third ideological effect is to get the audience, the readers, to act in the real world based on the history, motives, and goals that the writer attributes to the second persona in the text. In other words, the goal of this effect is to get readers to recognize themselves in the text and act the way the writer wants them to. I'll point these effects out along the way, and I'll also introduce some other important linguistic concepts. Please don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you. Initially, we notice 2 formulations in the negative. I'm not an elected official and I'm not a politician, before Meghan gets to a positive, what she is, an engaged citizen and parent. In the inserted like many, which is repeated throughout the letter, she performs association. Association is whenever a writer or a speaker claims that their feelings and thoughts are shared, so that linguistically they're not alone in feeling or thinking this way. Association belongs to the larger concept, alignment. With the adjective engaged, Meghan gives her opinion about herself and, more importantly, her opinion about other citizens, that they're engaged too. A praise like this can help strengthen the alignment process, because generally readers and people at large like to receive praise. Also, this is the first step in ascribing the same qualities to other citizens and parents as she ascribes to herself. So, this is the beginning of the first ideological effect, creating a collective we, a collective protagonist. Also, she uses 2 nouns, citizen and parent. Since all parents are citizens, but not all citizens are parents, she makes sure to address both groups, making the we as general as possible. Because initiates a so-called hypotactic clause. Hypotactic formulations indicate dependency. They're the opposite of paratactic formulations, where clauses are placed side by side and each clause could potentially stand on its own. Here, the hypotactic formulation is a foreshadowing of Meghan's main argument in the letter, paid leave. She states that she's writing as a mom to advocate for paid leave. With as a mom, it's sensitive to her to emphasize the capacity in which she's writing, a role that many readers can identify with. The intensifier deeply in at this deeply important time signals dramatic language, which is also seen with the adjective alarming. Obviously, it's sensitive to Meghan to indicate urgency, and she uses the current global situation as a stepping stone to make her point. Meghan writes that the working mom or parent is facing the conflict of being present or being paid, and that the sacrifice comes at a great cost. In the predicate, the working mom, the definite article the is used to point to a specific group, in this case a very large demographic. This is part of the first ideological effect, getting the readers to align themselves with the working mom, or parent as Meghan says, thus broadening the group she addresses. They're also supposed to see themselves as having to make sacrifices. This is the second persona that the readers need to identify with for the letter to have any impact. This is also why Constitutive rhetoric proposes that the audience doesn't necessarily exist prior to the text, but that the text brings the audience into existence. Meghan writes that the alleged sacrifice goes back to even longer than the past 20 or 30 years, where people have been in the pursuit of not just the American dream, but simply the dream of stability. She presupposes the truthfulness of the sacrifice that she just mentioned. So again, the readers are supposed to think that they've made these sacrifices. With American Dream, Meghan evokes a positive nationalistic discourse. Discourses that resonate with people are incorporated into more official statements as well. This is done for emotional effect, to remind the reader of a shared or an alleged shared history. This type of formulation makes the letter seem more formal and perhaps more calculated than just a regular letter. Meghan said she wasn't a politician, but this resembles a political speech. By mentioning this long period of time, she initiates the second ideological effect, making the collective we transhistorical, as if the same collective pronoun has existed for decades. The purpose of the second ideological effect is to link the we of the past to the we of the present. Critics, however, would say that the relationship between these two collective pronouns is more nuanced than the writer presents it as. With the adverb simply, Meghan ascribes a humble quality to the collective we. Humility is generally perceived as a positive characteristic, which can make it easier for readers to affiliate with this second persona. But again, we should note that this large we doesn't necessarily exist. It's brought to existence by the writer, in this case Meghan. In aligning herself with quote-unquote ordinary people, Meghan ascribes the same humble quality to herself, because next she seizes the opportunity to give her own narrative. In a context like this, narratives serve at least two purposes. One, to give positive details about the writer, and two, to make readers empathize with and ideally recognize themselves in the writer. She writes that she grew up on the $5 salad bar at Sizzler, and that it may have cost less back then, and that she honestly can't remember. With the words, "to be honest, I can remember," a conversational discourse is applied. The function of conversational discourses is to simulate a conversation with the reader. This also helps in making the text more relatable to the reader, at least in theory. Meghan writes that she does remember the feeling of eating out, that because she knew how hard her parents worked, eating out was something special, and she felt lucky. Here, she stresses the presumed fact that life hasn't always been easy for her. This is an important point to make for a writer whose income exceeds most by far, and whose lifestyle is quite different from the very same people she's trying to associate with. Also, another positive detail about her is revealed: gratitude, in this case feeling lucky when eating out. 2 times she uses feel words. She says that she remembers the feeling and that she felt lucky. And feeling is exactly the purpose of this passage. Pathos, appeal to emotion and pity. Meghan says that as a scout, when her troop wanted to celebrate, it was back to that same salad bar, because that's what those families could afford to do too. Here, the alignment continues. Meghan associates with other families at that time, and this is exactly her point with this letter as well, to associate with present-day families in order to advocate for paid leave. Thus, she makes the past match the present. This is a recurring appeal to the old collective we, the second ideological effect. Also, she gets to tell another positive detail about herself, that she was a scout. The positive details continue, but in an indirect fashion. She points to her work ethics and humility as she describes how she started working at the age of 13 and worked different jobs to cover odds and ends. I worked all my life, as it's sensitive to her to get across. Immediately after she says that she saved when and where she could, she places the conjunction but, which marks a contrast and also the most important part of the sentence. But minimizes or negates that which preceded it. By definition, the most important thing is to highlight that even saving when and where she could was a luxury. Right after she writes that she's worked all her life and indicates that she's worked hard, she ascribes those same qualities to the second persona in the letter, because she says people in our country work incredibly hard. The noun people makes this a general address, seeking to include everyone, more or less. Here she goes back to the first ideological effect, before she introduces the third ideological effect, claiming rights on behalf of the very same second persona that she's created in her letter. Now the goal is to get the readers to identify with this second persona to such a degree that they too will demand paid leave policies. The second persona's ask is allegedly soft, asking for a level playing field to achieve their version of a supposed common dream. She ascribes these opinions to the second persona in the letter, and these are the same opinions that the readers are supposed to recognize in order for them to take Meghan's side in this common dream, as she calls it. Here, for the first time, Meghan makes a distinction between her family and the majority of families. The opportunity to take their baby home and not having to worry about whether they should spend the first months with their baby or go back to work. Because of this distinction, it's all the more important that she's aligned her past, working hard and being poor, with the ongoing reality of the people she seeks to convince. Linguistically, this shows that she's able to relate to them and the presumed problems they share. Meghan goes on to say that no family should be faced with these decisions, and next she makes a logos appeal to logic and reason. This doesn't automatically mean that the argument being made is in fact logical or reasonable. It's just that type of appeal. The logos appeal is found in the economic argument she's making, that if paid leave were a right, the healthcare costs could be reduced and or better spent, and the country would be treating causes rather than symptoms. However, as readers, we should keep in mind that it doesn't necessarily follow that paid leave reduces healthcare costs. Critics would disagree with this link between two areas. The third ideological effect is in full effect in this latter part of the letter, getting readers to use their voices to demand paid leave policies. The concept of voice is very much on Meghan's mind. Here it's used twice. She uses this concept in numerous interviews. She used it in the Oprah interview when she mirrored her life in the life of the Little Mermaid, that she allegedly lost her voice living in the royal family, but that she got her voice back when she and Harry left their senior roles. Also, she used the alleged fact that many people are afraid to use their voice as a reason for participating in the Oprah interview. Critics, however, would say that one has nothing to do with the other. In that same interview, she used the concept of voice as a stepping stone to introduce the mental health series that she and Harry are working on. She said that it takes much courage to admit that you need help, thus justifying her own courageous actions. The concept of voice is cross-narrative, meaning it's part of Meghan's apparatus for responding to questions and also formulating letters. We observe the same pattern with politicians. They all have certain go-to words and narratives. The letter contains a few more paragraphs where Meghan continues with the use of the first and third ideological effect, and where she makes quite strong appeals to Congress. The purpose of this video is to show how constitutive rhetoric opens up for much more than just the matter at hand. It opens up for positive personal narratives as well. In this case, we observe narratives designed to oppose the critique that Meghan's faced. Narratives are particularly useful since they present the writer's or speaker's thoughts and feelings. Thoughts and feelings can't be disproven. This is one of the reasons why narratives are measured on a probability scale. This is called narrative probability. No matter which political subjects we disagree about, it's important to be aware of the rhetorical strategies that writers and speakers use to present them. Thanks for your time.